All right, so for our thesis, we had the conflict regarding the Palestine independence movement can be attributed to the 1948 Arab-Israeli War and the violence committed by the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO. However, the establishment of the Balfour Declaration in 1917 formed the foundation for the conflict in Palestine. And so with this Balfour Declaration, it originated after hundreds of years of being subjected to Ottoman control. It was issued on November 2nd, 1917 by British Foreign Minister Arthur Balfour, promising to establish a Jewish national home in Palestine. It resulted from the outbreak of World War II, and Great Britain administered Palestine on behalf of the League of Nations from 1920 to 1948, referred to as the British Mandate. And Arabs were very dissatisfied with British rule as it violated the McMahon-Hussein Correspondence, in which Britain agreed to recognize Arab independence in any proposed boundary after World War I due to their assistance in overthrowing the Ottomans in power. And the British responded to this by stating that these letters didn't apply to Palestine, which occurred in 1915. Therefore, the Balfour Declaration didn't violate any previous disagreements. This conflict of interest formed the ideological divide between the Arabs, who were predominantly Muslim and argued that Palestine should reunite with its historical counterpart Syria, and the Jewish people, who wanted the territory to serve as an independent state for Jewish minorities.
In the years that followed World War II, Great Britain gradually began to lose control over Palestine, primarily caused by four factors. 1. World public opinion turned against the British as a result of their policy of preventing Holocaust survivors from reaching Palestine. 2. The cost of maintaining an army of over 100,000 men in Palestine weighed heavily on British economy suffering from post-war depression. 3. Jewish paramilitary organizations, predominantly the Haganah, Irgun, and Lehi, continually launched attacks on strategic British installations, as well as soldiers and officials. 4. The U.S. Congress was delaying a loan necessary to prevent British bankruptcy. This delay resulted from the British refusal to satisfy a promise they gave to Harry Truman that 100,000 Holocaust survivors would be allowed to immigrate to Palestine. As a result of these factors, the UN terminated the British mandate on November 29, 1947. The UN's plan was to divide Palestine into three areas: an Arab state, a Jewish state, and a special international regime for cities of Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Zionist leaders, or advocates for an independent Jewish nation, accepted the plan, while Palestinian Arab leaders rejected it, and all independent Muslims in Arab states voted against it. Almost immediately, sectarian violence erupted and spread, killing hundreds of Arabs, Jewish and British, over the following months, resulting in the outbreak of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. After several tumultuous months of fighting, the Jews emerged victorious, and the State of Israel was established for them on May 14, 1948, by David Ben-Gurion and the Jewish People's Council. The neighboring Arab states greatly disapproved and intervened to prevent the partition and support for Palestinian Arab population.
As a result of the fighting and the establishment of the State of Israel, over 700,000 Palestinian Arabs were forced to flee their homes in the area, with the Israeli government preventing their return. Many of these refugees resettled in neighboring Arab states with a newfound hatred towards the Israelis. Jewish people had their own mass exodus from surrounding Arab states as they immigrated to the newly formed Israel. As Israel emerged from the war victorious, it gained a large portion of land that was previously designated to belong to Palestine by the UN, controlling almost 80% of the land in the area. Many of the remaining Palestinians resided in the West Bank, a heavily contested territory controlled by Jordan, which was later annexed by them in April 1950. By the late 1950s, the Palestinian refugees lost faith in the commitment of Arab governments to their cause. Students led by Yasser Arafat united together to form the Fatah, a liberation movement that used guerrilla raids against Israeli citizens. As a result of the Fatah and these multiple different independence movements, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or the PLO, was founded in 1964 with the purpose of the liberation of Palestine. This group, led by Arafat, was designed as the official representation of the Palestinians within the Arab League, as its leaders hoped that with its establishment, the PLO would encourage change in a less violent form. However, its members all had varying opinions on how to encourage this change. As ideological divides emerged, as its members were split between diplomacy, and violence. As a result of an Israeli attack against the PLO guerrilla camp in Kerama in 1966, during which over 300 Palestinians were killed, the PLO revised its stance towards the Israeli by declaring that the armed struggle was the only way to achieve Palestinian liberation, describing Zionists as racist and fanatic in its nature, aggressive, expansionist and colonial in its aims, and fascist in its methods. This newfound hardline stance towards the Israelis resulted in continual violence and terrorist attacks against Israeli citizens, as well as a drastic decline in international relations between Israel and its surrounding countries.
War broke out between Israel and its surrounding Arab countries from June 5th to the 10th in 1963 due to the mobilization of Egyptian forces along the Israeli border in the Sinai Peninsula that were sympathetic towards the Palestinian cause. Israel responded with a series of preemptive airstrikes against Egyptian airfields, catching the Egyptians by surprise and destroying the vast majority of the air force with few Israeli losses. Simultaneously, the Israelis launched a ground offensive into the Gaza Strip in the Sinai Peninsula, which again caught the Egyptians by surprise. After some initial resistance, Egyptian leader Gamal Abdel Nasser ordered the evacuation of the Sinai, with the Israelis aggressively pushing westward and conquering the entire peninsula. Syria and Jordan were induced by Egypt to attack Israel, yet Israeli counterattacks resulted in the seizure of East Jerusalem as part of the West Bank from the Jordanians, while Israel's retaliation against Syria resulted in its occupation of Golan Heights. On June 11th, a ceasefire was signed. Arab casualties were far heavier than those of Israel. Fewer than 1,000 Israelis had been killed compared to over 20,000 from the Arab forces. The Israeli moral and international prestige was greatly increased by the outcome of the war, and the area under Israeli control tripled. The displacement of civilian populations resulting from the war would have long-term consequences, as 300,000 Palestinians fled the West Bank and about 100,000 Syrians left the Golan to become refugees. Across the Arab world, Jewish minority communities were expelled, with refugees going to Israel or Europe.
For our historian's perspective, we contacted a professor from the Naval Academy, and he stated that the origins of guerrilla warfare tactics employed by Palestinians can be attributed to the outbreak of war between the Israelis and the resulting Arab nations in the war in 1948, as the Israelis experienced success that greatly diminished the amount of land designated for Arabs, creating a greatly increased amount of frustration with these Palestinians. Because of Israel's military superiority, Arab nations wouldn't lend outright support towards these Palestinian dissidents, which also played an integral role in these dissidents utilizing guerrilla warfare in order to promote their ideals and frustrations with their situation. He stated that they wanted to use violence and retribution for the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians that were ousted from their homeland, citing Arafat as a key figure in inducing these Palestinian feelings of violence towards the Israeli.